welcome some of you today, and welcome again if you were here yesterday. So for the benefit of those who have arrived today, a very quick, I wouldn't even say summary. It's so hard to actually summarize such an amazing day yesterday, as those of you who were here yesterday would attest. I found 4 words, hopefully that helps to bring together the really diverse range of knowledge, insights of yesterday. And it probably doesn't even do it justice, but somehow it all starts with C, not carbon. It actually all starts with CO, but not CO2. We will ban those words. But very holistically, the first word is commons. It's about resources that we all have, the atoms of delight, of people, of nature, and what we already have. As Gokai said, we already have everything. And the second word is connectivity. That we are all interconnected, community, people and nature, that brings joy. And this connectivity allows us to find patterns and therefore linchpins within this integrated system and leverage for change. To do that, we have to collaborate. That's a third word, collaboration. Together with different professions, the governments, financial sector, policies, and land and trees, soil, people. It's collaborating and joining up all these aspects to work together. And out of that, the fourth and last word is co-benefits. That we actually are building hope for the future. That all this intercropping, agroforestry, all this actually is doing it with people as part of the ecology that has co-benefits for each other. So we'll not bounce back, but bounce forward. So this is a very hopeful message, hopefully, for everybody. And we'll continue on this journey today. Yesterday, we mostly talked about nature-based solutions. And today, looking at more the community side of things, community-based solutions.
Hi, some of you, I think, started off by reading my book on the Eco House Design Guide many, many years ago. That's my Eco House, and it's still going strong in Oxford. I'll refer to it later. I want to talk to you about the urgency with which we address the issue of climate change. And that was our book on adapting with David Crichton, who for the insurance industry came up with this triangle of hazard, how bad's the risk, exposure, how exposed you are to it, and vulnerability, how rich or poor you are, or what sort of building you live in. Look, last month I was in the high Andes at the Antarctic Science Research Conference, and in the last 8 years, we've gone way up the hockey stick, and the rates of change are phenomenal. I mean, we can see sea temperatures in the last couple of years soaring, sea ice diminishing. And over the last 12 months, we have seen an average global temperature that's 1.64 degrees centigrade above the long-term average. I mean, 1.5, hello, we're even well past that now. The Paris Climate Accord agreement. Prepared to evolve. I think I've gone beyond adaptation now. I mean, that was with old predictions that were predicted to be +3 degrees centigrade by 2065, +5 by 2100. we're well past that. So just think, I mean, if this is true, how hot, how cold is it going to get? So I thought, and current policies do absolutely nothing to make a dent on that. Help from the government, building regulations, actually mandate actions now that could cause people to die in their own homes during extreme weather events. They somehow don't get it. For instance, from the 1st of April this year, we were supposed to not have any wood burning stoves in houses in rural Scotland. I mean, what happens when your electricity goes off for 2 or 3 weeks? I mean, how much help is your heat pump there? Don't rely on governments now. I don't think in a world of regular power cuts, you have to think differently, because it's not the systems that will save you, which is what the building regulations are all about pushing. It's the building itself. Have we learnt nothing from Grenfell? How could people mandate that people in remote Scotland can't have a wood burning stove? I mean, what the phase 2 report, and I put all these references here if you want to go back over it later, that the government failed from the Grenfell report, and not least because they put all of the decisions about human life, like the elderly in remote houses in Scotland, into the hands of inexperienced young people, HVAC engineers of the type who have not the experience to make those sort of decisions. So what I'm saying is, ignore the regulations, think about a different future. And I think I have a way forward for you, because my advice, all of you, build yourself or renovate a passive survival building. Because ultimately, I mean, what you really care about most is your children, your family, your nearest and dearest, your friends, right? So make sure you and they, when that extreme event happens, the extreme cold event, that you're safe. Okay, and people do not understand until it hits them that it's going to happen. It's like a flood, you know, your mindset's completely different after the inundation. Nobody thought in Vancouver you'd get to 49 degrees centigrade. You know, northern Europe, huge hurricanes and tornadoes, and of course the Texas ice storm. So design for the worst that can happen. And as an example, I'm going to give you the Texas ice storm. Okay, so this is in Texas, the 11th to the 20th of February 2021. Grids failed for up to 10 million people. They were up to, some of them, like 2 or 3 weeks without electricity. And you got the record-breaking freezing during that period. Up to 702 people died in various things, like they went out trying to drive away, but the roads were ice, so they'd drive on the roads, or carbon monoxides or fire or so on. But that's the sort of event which will increasingly happen everywhere, so be prepared for it. So I'm bringing you some lessons from the end of the earth about how to create that resilience in your own lives and buildings. And I've been working in Antarctica since 2019. And I'll give you a first lesson. We designed this extreme tent in 2019 and shipped it and built it over there. But what I learned from that was that it is the process. It's not the product that really matters. It's how you arrive at that product. That was what I learned from it. So during an extreme, like 200-mile-an-hour wind event on this exposed place in Collins Glacier in Antarctica, it ripped the external Dyneema skin off because the skin started getting very brittle. So we had to take another skin out, and I was there in February, put another skin on it. But the basic structure held in 200-mile-an-hour winds. That's a tent in 200-mile-an-hour winds. It was inspired, of course, in form by the Mongolian yurts. And this is Wouter van Marken-Lichtenbelt, who's been studying these yurts. What's really interesting about the yurts is because they're only just like canvas tents, and it's -40 outside, so you can learn a lot from them. They actually use the earth as a heat store. So it's only got sort of carpets and felt on the floor, but actually over time, over the winter, when they're herding out on the Mongolian plains, that will store and give you some thermal inertia in there. What we did was we studied the site and went through everything we could think of, and then just thinking about it first with a pencil and paper, and then doing more advanced modeling. And we looked at the structure and how we could improve it. But this first issue here is really important. Exactly where do you place that building in the landscape? And here's another place I was in April, which is on the most remote inhabited island on the Great Barrier Reef. This is Heron Island. This year we had the worst coral bleaching in history on the Great Barrier Reef. And a study done of 2023 bleaching, you can see that the coral dies, right? So that might be an indication of a losing resilience in a population as it dies off. So obviously where you're located makes a difference in terms of the waters around you and the temperature of the waters. But on this coral atoll around the island, you got major bleaching in that central shallow lagoon, and on those deep edges, which are open to the cooler currents, you didn't get bleaching at all. So exactly place your house where it is going to be safest from the worst heat or the worst cold. So micro-location on a site is important. We also explored some extraordinary materials. This is Orvate, which is what we built the tent of. And it's used for medical restoration. Is made of 4 different layers. And so we thought, my goodness, if we make the tent, it works brilliantly in 3 layers, 3 skins. But what we did then is we took it, we asked the experts what sort of material would be most resilient to those conditions, the cold. And then we had to lab test it. So we took it to a herring storage facility in Hull, and at -20, and tested it to see if its performance was, warranted the expense of building it. We then built the test structure. We built the structure in Britain. We made adjustments to it on my kitchen table. And it's got 2 skins. It's got an inner suspended skin under the tent and an outer skin there, held up by 2 columns in the middle. We then tested it on site in Antarctica in the shed, and then we put it on site. So this is the lesson from that tent. Don't just jump to modeling something, Really study the site in great depth. Try and source appropriate vernacular archetypes for inspiration. See how other people in those extreme climates do it. You can simulate improvements at that time and explore and ask for expert advice. Go out and ask the experts what you should be doing, because all of us are really pretty ignorant about a lot of it. And then do bench tests, do field tests. And then only then do you finalize envelope and final designs. And then of course, you have to take it to site, but you continually measure the conditions and so on to make sure that it's working appropriately, and monitor it over time to see what you can learn from how it works. You see, in Antarctica, and when you're in that Texas ice storm in your home, and you've been without electricity for 2 weeks or a week, or every single kilowatt hour will matter. Every single degree centigrade or half degree will really matter. So harvest it. So we looked at how the building research stations in Antarctica worked. And this is the Chilean base where we were staying, next to the Russian Bellinghausen base. This is the Chilean base here. So we did a study of working conditions in that main living area. Now, you approach this, you have to go upstairs because it gets a lot of snow, but you go in through an entrance hall, and the bedrooms are here with a corridor down the middle, and there's a door to the outside here. You walk through the living room to the dining room, which is next to the kitchen, and above that room is the workspace and the office. And then you've got the laboratories there. So the progress of people through a building is really important. So you go in through the entrance hall, get rid of your cold clothes, you walk through the living room, and with this, you're working in the workspace upstairs, and here's the dining room and the kitchen. So we did a thermal study of it, and these are the types of lessons you learnt from looking in detail. This is the bedrooms. You've got a couple of bunks there. You've got a window with an opening window, which they often open. And when you're out at work, it's just cranks along at here. When you're out at work, it's just chugging along with the background temperature. When you go in there in the evening, you turn the heater on and you turn it off when you're going to sleep, and then the temperature falls. So it's got a pattern. It's occupied at night and the heating's off. And as soon as the heating's off, you're losing the temperature because that lightweight building loses heat fairly quickly over time. And when I say quickly, it's sort of 7 degrees, 8 degrees, 10 degrees overnight, because it's just a lightweight timber structure. Now look at this from the Texas ice storm. This is a broken pipe in a Texas house, and that's come through the ceiling. That's frozen icicles on the fan where the water's got through. So inside the house where people are living during that Texas event, it's freezing inside. So that's how fast. Ceiling fan frozen. You see, that's what you have to, I mean, you look then, I was talking last night about these pit houses. So way back then, what they would do is they would retreat into the earth. 5000 BC, it's like on Orkney and Shetland, we have the earth-sheltered houses, because 5,000 years ago, Japan, China, Canada, Mexico, Texas, you lived in the pit houses because you got that thermal stability from the earth. And what you'll find in a building is that there's never only one way to do something. So there's 2 ways. You can either do a lightweight tent in Mongolia, yeah? And if you do that, you have to have a stove inside it because you have to keep heating it. Because, I mean, it will go to the outside temperature very, very quickly. So you could have a lightweight structure and heat it continuously when you're occupying it, or you can have a heavyweight structure like they do in the Middle East a lot. This is Nepal, where you're using these vast walls and a small, stove to just top up the heat in them, to protect you from the heat in northern Rajasthan. You've got any building is more or less coupled to the sky or the earth. Now, what you've got 9 meters down is the stable earth temperature. You've got the mean of all the annual temperatures. So this is increasing time lags over time. So if you're out in the air, you just revert to the air temperature. If you're down, protected by the building, it will depend on whether you're facing the sun or away from it and how far into the earth you go. And so up here, you've got no difference between outside temperature and inside. And here you can get to nearly a month. So thermal mass is, as was said yesterday, you have to consider it to be, I think, a key feature for durable low emissions buildings, because if you have a lightweight building, you're getting much more thermal amplitude inside, unless you heat or cool it. If you get a heavyweight building, you're getting a much steadier temperature in it. And this is amazing work done on affordable low energy comfort for France. And what Tim Di Toldi is showing us is that by 2080 to 2100, you could probably put that in the middle of the century, probably about 2050, kilowatt hours per meter square per annum, you're going to have far more energy needed to cool these places in lightweight buildings than medium weight or heavyweight, because in the heat, and you've probably all, many of you been into the Mediterranean to see these heavy buildings, like in Turkey, where they stabilize using that mass. So this is, here you would look at temperatures, no thermal mass, high mass, medium mass, low thermal mass, actually. So it's less comfortable and more energy consuming and more emissions unless you use that mass to stabilize the temperature. Now here, this is in Saudi Arabia. What you have to think of is like do you remember the Antarctic base where you went into the lobby? And here in Saudi Arabia, this is an ordinary modern house. You've got a protected living room, which is buffered. If this is north up here, it has no access to the south. So this is a south facing and a southwest facing bedroom, which is got this fairly psychotic indoor temperature. So there's the variation over, 5 degrees over a day, because if it's exposed to that sun, then you are much more, you just have a much more free running amplitude to the temperature. And if you buffer yourself from that solar gain, it gives you that stable indoor temperature. So that's horizontal thermal landscaping of buildings. No way you're going to have the heat and the cold. And this is vertical thermal landscaping from just a terrace house in Holland. You've basically got the buildup of heat going up this is an adaptive house, so you shade from the south, but you have to know that those top floors is where the heat builds up. So you'll know that that's warmer upstairs in winter and cooler downstairs in summer. So you've got vertical thermal landscaping or microclimates and horizontal as well. Now, here's another thing. Is at the end of that bedroom corridor, there is a door outside. So that's to the outside. So that's a very cold door in Antarctica here. And so when you open that door, obviously, the temperature inside plummets. So if you look at this, these are ice houses where in a good ice house in Britain, you could keep ice stored for up to about 18 months. And what you had to do is you had to keep the heat. This is underground. You had to keep the heat away from the ice. So you've got one little lobby, second, third, and then another one here full of straw. And you could even keep ice frozen over from winter to summer in these huge Iranian ice houses, again, using that thermal inertia of the soil. But this idea that you have to retreat from the cold or the heat is important. This is a passive house. This is the first one. Yeah. And this is the issue of the thermal amplitude, because it's south facing, super insulated, large glass. I mean, they wouldn't design it like that again, but it just shows you that you've got this very, very frisky internal temperature. And this is my Oxford house, where you've got a porch here, you've got north-facing rooms here, south-facing rooms, and a sun space on the back. And what that gives you, this is the temperature last month or in July. This is my living room over ground floor living room. That's the first floor study. And this is the north facing bedroom. So you've got three phenomena. The further up the building you go, this is the top floor, the hotter it is. And this is the north facing porch. So if you face it to the north, it's going to be cooler. But even in hot weather, we're getting hot here, then you are you're gaining heat there. But this thermal stability is what thermal mass will give you. And here's the difference. Here's, for those same two compared, you've got 5 days here of that pioneering passive house. This is my pioneering eco house. Top floor again, you're getting a lot of movement, but this is again what that thermal mass will give to you. So think about that. Even if you don't have a whole mass house, have areas where you've got some thermal inertia. So this is another thing. How long have I got? Okay, this is another thing, which is the cold air inversions within buildings. In Antarctica, it's very pronounced. So you look down the staircase and you've got 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees centigrade different at the bottom of a staircase, the top of a staircase. And in Antarctica, a lot of the modern, sexy research bases, this is a 3-story base from Britain, have got these big thermal, this one's got a 3-story atrium in it with glazed wall. And you get laboratories with hatches left open and so on. But here's something really interesting is that what people do when they come into the lobby in this Antarctic base is they take off their clothes, leave them in the lobby, but they're still cold. And they carry the cold through the building with them. So you've got carried cold is a phenomenon. And, you know, somebody said to me from Australian base that, oh, you can't open windows in Antarctica. Hello? You've got a smelly toilet, you open it pretty chop, I can tell you. There's lots of reasons to do that. So people carry cold, and this is where you get this big plumber every lunchtime as they come in for their lunch. And there's lots of feeling and preferences. These people in these Antarctic bases all feel very comfortable. And the one thing is you probably all know people adapt to different temperatures according to what climates they live in. So if you live in Portugal, you're happy up here. If you live in Pakistan, you're happy going up to 35, 40. Or 35 we've found is a good thing. So if you're in Shanghai, it's different from Melbourne, England, Darwin, or Pakistan. People adapt to those temperatures they normally occupy. And then you get a lot of interpersonal variability. He's wearing very cold clothes. He's wearing a t-shirt and jeans. This man has got brown fat developed. He's a boatman. He's actually developed brown fat so he can stay warm for longer when he's working out there. So you look at the world around you, and I would suggest everybody gets a thermal imaging camera. Look at the world around them. Look at this reflection here. You get huge reflection also from the cold outside. And indoors, every single beam you've got or pipe or will carry heat or cold with it. So think about where all those runs of pools of heat and cold are. And I suggest avoid internal cold air inversions, or make sure you design them out, but avoid excessive glazing. And do you think architects do that? Oh no, look at this. This is the Brazilian bases. They're Corbusian or Mesian pavilions full of glass. And obviously behaviors make a huge difference. Where you sit and what your furniture is extremely important too. And here we have kotatsu in Japan, where you just have a little heater under your rug. 2 minutes, okay. And this is the new move to not heating the building or cooling the building. You just heat the person, which is probably what you all do in your studies anyway. You're not going to turn the central. Even our dear late Queen did it. She didn't heat the room. She heated them. So think about this, that when you're designing your building, think about conduction, how, cold air, cold bridges and stuff. Think about convection and reflection from outside surfaces are really important. And you think about the created heat in a space and also how you carry heat or cold through a building. So protect people from, the passage of people carried discomfort, and behaviors are obviously important. But resilience on bases, if this is going online, is many, many different things. Resilience to wind, to rain, to two things, biggest killers in Antarctica: fire and carbon monoxide poisoning. So they're important. Now all these countries with extreme events are developing these heat refuges, these cold refuges. Every city in Britain should have them now. I mean, even hospitals are failing, like this is Guy's and Thomas's getting too hot. And I've used some of this thinking to help people design bases on the moon. But there's two big things now. We have to move from thinking about energy efficiency. That's about the kit. And what really matters is sufficiency. Energy efficiency is about continuous, short-term, marginal technological improvements based on nudging the marginal gains from mechanical efficiency. What we have to move to now is sufficiency thinking, where you want that promise to affect real radical reductions in practice in the short time at very low prices. So one move is from mechanical ventilation thinking to a world in which buildings are run for as much as the time as possible with little personal comfort systems or natural ventilation. Only when you need it do you heat or cool them. Yeah, okay. And how much of the year can a building provide acceptable comfort without mechanical cooling systems? What's the internal thermal temperature of your building? That's the amplitude of the thermal personality of your rooms. And how long will it take for that building to lose heat or gain it when an extreme event hits? Once you've learnt to build your own passive survival buildings, teach everybody else how to do it. Make sure that everybody in your community is safe. And what they're doing in Australia is they're creating climate safe refuges in the houses of the elderly. So you don't refurbish the whole house. You make sure that granny has a warm corner in winter or a very cool corner, and that's having huge impacts. Join us when we discuss these sort of things at Kate. You've got invitations to it on your table in Seville, or come to our next one in 2026 in Phoenix, Arizona. And we've got lots of books and links on there. So thank you very much indeed.
All right, I wanted to talk today about what I'm doing because I think it's a grand challenge that isn't about engineering, but it is. So don't let engineering put you off if you're not an engineer. And if you are an engineer, let it really make you think about how we're doing things and how we need to do those things. I want to start with a challenge. See if my thing will obey me. There we go. And that challenge is that the current approach that we have to sustainability that we've built up since the 60s and 70s is not up to the challenge of changing unsustainable whole systems. We've got plenty of evidence for that. We've got lots of intention, but it's not up to it. We don't have it. Now, what I do think is that history holds the key, and that key is corrective discipline. Let's get into that. I remember that I chose mechanical engineering back in 1981 when I went to university, because of climate change. Well, okay, we weren't calling it that then, we were calling it global warming, right? And we knew that it was from fossil fuels. We knew fossil fuels were a security risk because we'd had the OPEC oil embargo, and we knew that we had to change what we were doing, right? So I don't know why it always seems like that's new news to everyone, but you know, in the 80s, we had the definition of sustainability from the Brundtland Commission, thinking about people of the future and that making sure that they can meet their needs while we're meeting our needs. And that seemed perfectly logical. And when I started thinking about it in terms of my own family, that's people you see here, my grandfather, Julius, who was 10 years old in 1917, my father, who was 10 years old in 1947, my brother, who was 10 years old in 1977, and my nephew, who was 10 years old in 2017. You might notice that this is 100 years of a family. And that idea, that responsibility for people that we will know, that kind of deep moral conviction that we are gifting something to our grandchildren. I think there's enough people who have worked through those ideas that we should not be impeded by the moral question of sustainability. It is responsibility. And yet, I'm just wondering what have we been doing? I know people and I meet people all the time whose lives have been impacted by that knowledge of well, the biggest one, climate change, but we've also got, of course, biodiversity loss and soil loss, and you know, there's a very large range of things that we do unsustainably, basically, because it works. And so, if you think about this in terms of that family that I was talking about, you see that it was my grandfather's age of people and my father's age of people who knew that there was something going on, who set up the Mauna Loa Observatory to start keeping track of atmospheric carbon dioxide. And then my generation and my brother's generation, it's been our lifetimes as someone born in 1963, that this grand unsustainability, this pushing of Earth systems beyond its safe operating zone has occurred. And if you look at what is now the job, it's to flatten that curve, no more growth of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We are pushing up against what you might call a failure limit if you're an engineer, 60% chance of catastrophic impacts. That would be called a failure limit. Don't do that. So what that's going to require is why I'm saying our thinking about sustainability and doing good things isn't up to this task. We have to think of something else. And oh, and just for fun, there's those next generations. Yep. When did you become aware that more good things and trying to make things more sustainable is not going to correct the unsustainable trajectory? I can see the back of the group. Anybody put your hand up that you've had that aha moment? Because it's really good stuff. Okay, good. I was there in the 90s and the 2000s working on the renewable energy and hydrogen and carbon capture and storage and geothermal and building energy efficiency. And it felt really good to be working on the good things. And then one day my son came home from school and his class had watched An Inconvenient Truth. heard of that movie. And he was really afraid. He said, this climate change things, is it really that bad, Mom? And, you know, as a aware person, I know it's worse than in that movie. But I said, yes, it's quite serious. And he said, well, but you're working on sustainability, right? And I said, yes. And he said, oh, so it'll be okay then. And that was my aha moment, that I kind of, you know, your own son, maybe you can lie to yourself, but it's hard to just not be straight with them that, you know what, if I am successful at all the research I do and everyone who is working on the good things is successful, not even close. There's something else. So I said, no, I don't think so. And he said, well, then you have to figure out what will work. So my aha moment was to link that family, go ahead, look a couple generations into the future, and to understand that this is the requirement. And in engineering speak, requirement is the thing you have to do. More sustainable is different than this. This is downshift. It's giving the gift of survivable global warming to our great grandchildren. So that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm working on. And I believe it's possible because we've done this sort of thing before. I'm showing you here the trajectory of explosions of high pressure boilers in steamships. And the exponential growth of those explosions was going right along with the exponential growth of the economic growth from steamships, from the wealth creation from steamships, from the passenger numbers in steamships. And what you can see is that that growth declined. There was a turning point. There was something that happened. And that's what we want to study. So I have been studying these turning points, these shifts, these times when something happened that doesn't appear to have been expected. On the upside, it wasn't expected, because the way that the man-made catastrophes were playing out, while it was regrettable, it was the price of progress. What were you going to do? Shut down the entire economy because of explosions of steamships? No. But something happened, and it was the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. That's what happened. Research into how do you keep a boiler from exploding, and then the creation of the discipline of mechanical engineering. And I guess maybe if I go back one more, it's interesting to note that the ASME boiler code was published at that year, and that's what made the explosions go down. And we see this over and over and over again. The number of deaths of linemen in the era, this is 1911 on the left, and the number of deaths was faster than the recruitment. They had such a crisis trying to roll out electricity, a very profitable new enterprise, which my great grandfather actually was a power developer, made lots of money doing that. But it is a completely 100% hazardous job. They had a crew that just hauled away the linemen's bodies because they died all the time, and then they didn't. And that change, that shift, that removes the unsustainable, the unacceptable, the threat to life from the equation through engineering. And this is a special kind of engineering. This is a corrective type of engineering. It turns out that a lot of it is just engineering, like the straps and the materials and the hard hats and the harnesses. Those all had to be engineered. They weren't easy things to figure out, how to save someone from falling without killing them in the process. But it was all done once it was decided to be done. And now it's used because that is the culture of that industry. That story of boilers exploding that I told you about, that resulted in the first United States law that regulated industry. And that was passed in 1852. And in the law, in that act, which is now a foundation for law, is that enterprises shall be compelled to consider the value of life. It's not talking about any particular technology. It's talking about the value of life. And this is how it works. I've researched about a dozen of these turning points now, and they all happen the same way. So I think there's a dynamic system pattern that's happening, which means if that same pattern keeps happening, then we can use it. So let's look at this pattern. Somebody creates something, right? James Watt, steam engine, very cool thing. And that invention makes better things. And those better things get picked up and brought to enterprise through business, investment, risk taking, all that good stuff. And we get economic growth. And that's great. We get new services and stuff. But whatever that invention is, it always comes with a price. And there's downsides. There's human man-made disasters. The problems grow. Scientists warn of future disasters. It's getting worse. And now we're stuck in a wicked problem. And the wicked problem is where we've got a good thing, which also has bad things. It's enterprise. Policy isn't going to touch this. And so we're stuck until we're not. And when we get unstuck is when that wicked problem triggers some expert in practice, expert in research, and they get together. And sometimes it's just one person. Sometimes it's a person that grows a little group quite quickly. Sometimes it's always a research institute, though. It's always around a place where what those people are finding out can be trusted. And so that then creates a convergence of a bunch of different ideas together into a corrective discipline. And I called it a transdiscipline here because it spreads out beyond where it started. And a discipline is formed, and that discipline informs government of the regulations that are needed. The government can't figure these things out by itself. It never has in all these examples. So then the regulation, once it exists, drives standards and training, and the presence of good standards, good training, good research base, the requirement by government that in order to have license to operate, businesses must value life. Then you get not the end of industry as you know it, but this crash in the horribleness of it. And this, here's example. So the safety engineering started in 1911 with the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire that looks like a couple of people called a meeting of 62 engineers, walked into a room, walked out of a room saying, we will prevent what's preventable. And that's what they did. They started the American Society of Safety Engineers, which literally changed the future. There's your boiler safety emergency management. That started in 1971 with a horrible disaster in managing the response to a hurricane, where the disaster response killed 350 people and the hurricane killed 2. So yeah, so then we got a correction. Waste management engineering, that started with the Love Canal cancer cluster disaster, toxic waste disposal. Environmental engineering started with the fire of the Cuyahoga River because it was so full of toxic materials, and reliability and safety engineering, that's around nuclear and aviation. And now let's say transition engineering around fossil fuels and the prolific, unjustified squandering of an amazing, unreplaceable resource. That's what that is. So here we are today. We have the wicked problems. We're all driving cars. We don't know what else we would do. We fly from one end of the planet to the other because we can. Yeah, that's where we're sitting today. So today, those wicked problems have triggered me. thanks to my son. And we're gathering together people to do the research, bring together knowledge into a corrective discipline. That we will then recommend regulations that need to be put in place. And this goes across freight, across transport, across buildings, housing, and then provide training, and the rest is history. So that's where we get to, is the idea of transition engineering being about prospecting the trajectory that leads to whole system correction into a safe operating zone for whatever your economy is, the disruption to do that, building the transition mechanisms and the projects that shift the technological enterprise onto the new trajectory. And that is disruption by discipline. And that's the end of my remarks.
Thank you so much to both Susans. Are there any questions from the audience? Would you introduce yourself and speak clearly into the mic?
Yes, hello. For the first, Sue, the Texas ice storm, the lessons learned, have any of those lessons be turned into action, or has it gone back to business as usual? Richard Kai, layperson, retired.
Thank you.
Well, I was so interested in Susan's talk. That's absolutely brilliant. And one of our problems is we have all these vested interests. I think in the Texas ice storm, it's absolutely definite that it's the energy system of Texas, which was governed by irresponsible commercial interests. And I think that they have significantly had to up their game. So it's made a radical impact on that. Don't know if that's turned into...
Actually, the Texas grid, Texas has its own grid.
Yeah.
And it doesn't want the federal government of the United States telling it what to do. And so it is not covered by the same kind of regulations as the rest of the United States, which would have required their gas power plants to be able to run through that cold. So that's what happened, was that they were not subject to regulation, which fits my model.
So I wanted to bring this. Last week we had the 50th anniversary of solar research in Britain, and next year I've got the 30th anniversary of my famous rear view, which is the first integrated solar roof in Britain on the Oxford Eco House. So why has it taken so long, 30 years, for people, for the legislations or the legislators not to say every new house has to have solar? Susan, can you tell me?
Yes, and there's a very good reason, and that is that until recently, quite recently, if your neighbor had put his solar energy into the grid, it would have knocked out your computer. You have to have the power electronics to be able to take the DC solar power, rectify it to fit the frequency of the grid, and to behave itself, basically. So if you want to use your own solar power in your own house, you usually take it and put it into a battery and then have an inverter that creates the energy that your appliances can use. So that power electronics, that took research and it took development to create that, so that the technology existed to do that. Remember, the grid wasn't built to run backwards. It was built to run from big power plants down, with stepping down of voltage the whole time. That big voltage gives you the strength to keep the frequency going the way it's supposed to. And so that little trickle of solar actually just sort of messes up the grid. So it wasn't philosophical. It was just power engineering.
There's a question from back there, Sandy.
Yeah, hi. It was partly a comment, I think. Professor Sandy Halliday, Gaia Research, and I studied engineering design and appropriate technology in 1982, or chicken shit and windmills, as we call it. And we were all completely unemployable as graduates. Nobody gave a sod. Anyway, I think part of the reason that the solar technology didn't take off at that time is that there's still a very strong argument that actually there's more to be gained from conservation than there is from generation. And if I had a superpower, it would be to call out the energy generation argument every second, every minute, until we actually start to do the cost-effective thing, which is to turn out some of these sodding lights. It's just the opportunities in terms of conservation are enormous. And yeah, we can generate all we like, but while we're flying around the world to every single corner of it and to the moon in order to save the planet, I think we're on hiding to nothing. And in that respect, Susan Online, I am completely on board with you.
There's another question, Gail.
Hi, Gail Halverson, Cedarland. Sue, what is this big disruption? I mean, all the others were quite simple, the examples you gave. It was one particular sort of technology and one solution. But the climate change, there's flooding, there's drought, there's so many different problems that and we've had the disruption I would have thought started, 30 years ago, if not more. So what do you see as the tipping point that is the disruptor that finally changes things?
Okay. I think it was 4 years ago when my PhD students and some people from GATE, Global Association for Transition Engineering, we asked that question of ourselves, and we had we used all the tools that we had developed, and we came up with an answer. And I don't know if you're going to like it, but it's that it's the transition of the oil industry. We run on oil because it is just gushing at us. There's no restriction. The only time it's been restricted is, of course, an embargo or something like that. And then, we have a fit. And so the only way actually is that the oil industry figures out that they've been chumps and that they've been producing this amazingly useful material and giving it away at very low cost. And the only way then they can make a big profit is by flooding the market with it, and pushing us to continue to buy it. And if you look forward, which some of my research students are doing, what you see is that the only way to continue as an enterprise is to do a fancy trick of making more money selling less oil. And so we are working on that business model pivot. When the oil coming into the system is declining by 10% a year, then the rest of us will get clever very quickly. That's a strange answer, but there you go.
Could I ask you, Susan, the trouble is that it's the poorest people who have the least efficient cars, who have the biggest impacts from increasing prices of energy. How do you compensate for that?
Right. If we look at what we've got ourselves into and what we all have to spend just to do simple things like get to work or have a place to live, what you see is that the re-engineering of the way that those systems work, not the car itself. The car was the problem. The car has trapped us down the cul-de-sac. And reorganizing any given village or town or city or economy to use less oil frees up so much resource that being able to find how people get around now that especially electric cycles exist, that's going to be a massive game changer, is actually the big disruption. So I know we've been fixated on electric cars and things like that, but it's a whole system problem. So people being able to get to work, think of it as a whole system. There's there's so much amazing stuff going on. I guess follow us on our Facebook. We're in Orkney, cranking out interesting things. I don't think we're going to have time to go
Susan,
into.
can I ask you for a reality check on that? If you take American towns, and I've lived in a couple.
Yeah. Oh, well, those are the hardest
I
ones.
mean,
Sorry.
yeah, the Chicago plan. I mean, these places cannot exist without cars. So what's going to happen? And do places cease to exist?
Probably some. There's definitely a retraction. The 2-hour commute in America is silly, and it's an abomination. Look forward 100 years. It's not there, so it starts to go away sometime. That time would be now. And the reorganization of the materials that we've already invested in, the things we've already built, the mess we've already made, that is going to take ingenuity, organized ingenuity. And it actually is possible. The more people who are thinking about doing it, and I don't mean I don't mean in a general sense. I mean, wherever you are, look at the world without cars. And you all have seen what I've been seeing for 20 years now. COVID showed us what it looks like. The world does exist without cars.
There's Sandy and also Matt. So
Yeah, sorry. I think we need to introduce a little bit of depth grammar into this conversation, because to assume that the poorest people in the planet are causing the most damage is simply nonsense. Actually, we know that the richest people on the planet are actually causing the most damage. And the poorest people on the planet are the ones who are most vulnerable to the damage that is being caused. So there are quite a lot of poor people who drive cars, but there are also an awful lot of poor people who have no car. So I just think we need to be just step back a little bit from this being us and them, and perhaps realize that all of that money that all of those Teslas is going to fund one man and his 11 children to go to Mars. So, you know, he stole the agenda. He's stolen that.
Sorry, Sandy.
Yeah.
Could I just
Excuse me, so
Yeah.
you've been speaking for a long time.
Yeah.
Excuse me? Okay, I'm just about to finish, but I just think that's what we need to do. We just need to introduce a little bit of depth grammar and intelligence into this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I'm just talking about studies of Australian cities and American cities where you have the inner circle where the rich people live with their big cars and stuff, and just whole systems where the poorest people live on the fringes of the cities and have the biggest commutes often. So I think that, you know, in terms of, you know, extremes, it's obviously an issue, but there is an issue that the poorest people will suffer most from the increase of fossil fuel prices, I think. Many of the poorest, I mean, not people in deserts.
I think Susan already answered that, but
Yeah.
we've got Matt and then Sam who've got questions.
Yeah, it was just to delve a bit into, I guess, what you've learned about the triggers and how the political links work. And if I might give you an example here in Aberdeen. So sorry, Matthew Club, I run a practice here in Aberdeen. And we've been working with the community in Torry, where you're going to go this afternoon. And there's a complete disconnect of thinking because between how these various things link. And the example I'm giving here is a waste to energy incinerator that's been installed in the city because we're moving away from landfill to burning waste. And that's being used to power a district heating system. And from the research that we've done on this project, it looks like burning waste creates 2 or 3 times more emissions than burning gas. So taking these homes off a gas grid and putting them on this heat network is in theory increasing the emissions of these homes in the short term. The incinerator's been built on the promise that one day it will have CCS attached to it, so it's all good. So, you know, engineers are doing what they think is right. The council are being sort of sold something that they think's right, but there's just this bigger picture thing that's completely missing, and the problem's being misdiagnosed. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, about 100 years worth of boilers blowing up was people making things the way they thought it would work, and then they changed it. And basically, I said it takes research, it takes informing policymakers about what regulations are needed. And there's another magic ingredient, and it's honesty. There is no carbon capture and storage. It's not a thing. For that to be still proliferating as magic beans, it's like, yeah, we need that honesty thing. So that'll be a big disruption.
And we're running out of time, but one final question from Sam.
Very quickly. Sam Foster, layperson. Susan and Susan and Sue, the stuff you've talked about all seems to rely on tweaks to the existing capitalist economic system. Do you think what we're trying to achieve is realistic in our existing capitalist economic system, or are we going to have to move to a different system? Short answer, please.
Well,
I don't think you can change the capitalistic system. I mean, that's not a thing I have purview to do, but in the pattern of how things work from the past, when the available technology changes or works in a different way, then the economy adjusts around that. So I think holding engineers to account for what they're doing, that's where the regulation comes in, is the way that it has to go. But
I think that Susan hit the nail on the head when you said that change comes when people die. And so I think that, for instance, if we have a system where the power is not in the hands who are making profits from big decisions like refurbishing whole, estates, but it goes down to how do we keep the individual person safe in their own home, and these small scale investments in making sure that every old lady has a safe house, a cozy corner for Christmas, and once you have that shift in focus on what regulations for, not helping your friends in industry and their pals in politics, but trying to make every single person in the system safe, then I think change will come.
Thank you so much.